Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Huyer. I'm moderating this panel on towards inclusive information systems. Good evening to you in North America, and good morning to you in Africa and elsewhere. Because of time, and we have three panelists today, I will move right into the first presentation. I'll start with an overview on gender and ICT and digital information systems. What have we learned from the experience of the CGIAR and currently from the program AICCRA, accelerating the implementation of CGIAR climate research in Africa? Sorry, I'm just looking for the right screen. There we go. Okay, as I said, this is from the experience of the AICCRA program of the CGIAR and previously from the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security program. What do we know about gender and social inclusion and ICT? In general, we know that while the digital gap in mobile access is closing, it is not closing in rural areas. And so for women and youth farmers and farmers away from, obviously far away from urban areas, there are still significant digital gaps. As well, we see there is a continuing gender gap. Men tend to use higher quality or more sophisticated digital technologies, including internet access. So more men will have a smartphone than women. But again, in rural areas, that difference may not be that great, and more people in general may not have access to smartphones. But we do know that for women, affordability is a big barrier in terms of affordability of technology, but also the access costs and the usage costs. Gender norms may also play a role in lower rates of ownership, in that if there's one or two phones in the household, it may be the men or the young people who have access and use it the most. And in some cultures, it seemed inappropriate for women to use phones without supervision. And finally, globally, women are not involved in the IT industry, and that's both in the global north and the global south. If they are involved, it tends to be in very low numbers, so that technological innovation is not necessarily something that women are able to take advantage of. This graph is a good example of the differences for rural and urban populations in accessing and using mobile agriculture or livestock services, and also shows you the really strong gender gaps as well in some areas. So women are the blue bar and men are the orange bar. And these are, this chart shows reasons why respondents in rural areas in Kenya are not using M services in either agriculture or livestock. The largest reason for women there are two of the most frequent reasons cited are they are not aware that these services are available, or they are not available at all. And you can see that it's a much larger gap for women and men in terms of awareness, but not a large gap in availability. Other major reasons for women include they don't know how to use them, they don't have ID in order to access a phone or pay-as-you-go time. There's a language barrier, they don't see it as relevant, they have trouble reading, so there are literacy issues, trouble understanding, other literacy issues, and so forth. So these are all major barriers for both women and men, but primarily in many cases for women. We also know that women and men, as you've seen, there are differences in access and use of mobiles. We found from our other research that women and men tend to use different technologies, different communications technologies differently, and prefer different technologies. So we found previously, this is from 2017 in Senegal, that women prefer radio overall and to a greater extent than men. We are also finding that now in our work in rural areas, and Renee may talk about that a little further. Women are less comfortable with SMS and more comfortable with voice calls. So in general, we are finding that they are more comfortable with voice rather than SMS or other forms of digital. We also know that they're very comfortable with television. Television in Kenya and a new program in Zambia is demonstrating that women are watching these shows on farm makeovers or improved farm production and crop techniques, and are benefiting even more than men proportionately in terms of how much their production increases and how their income increases. Work in Senegal recently shows, Senegal and Ghana shows some of the differences that we found in access. So the top two graphs are from Ghana. The AICCRA has done an analysis of the users of their Climate Information Services CSA mobile network. And on the left, you see that 2/3 are male, 1/3 are female. The right graph shows, the pie chart shows what form of information is most used and most accessed, and the gray section of the pie chart that takes up half is voice SMS. So primarily, even the men as well are using voice SMS more than other formats. The yellow is word of mouth from friends and neighbors and family members. 11 is text and 8 is video. And what they did find is that predominantly women were in the 50% that were using voice access. The bottom chart shows time slots where people used radio in Senegal, where they AICCRA was disseminating climate and agro information via radio in certain regions of the country, as you can see, and did an analysis. And there are differences in regions in preferences for times and differences between women and men in preferences for time. But what you find consistently across all the regions, that the best time for women to listen to the radio was after 6 o'clock. So while men and youth had differences in options for listening to radio programs during the day, for women predominantly it was after 6 o'clock and in some cases before 9 in the morning. So these differences in type of channel of information and timing of availability are really important for understanding how women can, understanding how women can use these services and ensuring that they're able to hear the information, use the information, and benefit from it. The other comment to make about climate information and women is that often women need different or slightly different kinds of information or different content. So because they tend to grow different crops, they may have different weather information needs, as well as different agro advisory needs. So some research, and again, this is from research in Senegal, found some differences in the types of information and timing of information on climate information. So women tended to be more interested in information on rain onset, whereas men tend to be slightly less interested in onset and slightly well, that is the one they're most interested in, but you see differences in their interest in, for example, the daily rain forecast or dry spells or wet spells, and the other way around. Men were more interested in that kind of information. So it's useful to know that there's not going to be one homogeneous understanding and preference for type of information, but it varies by sex and often can vary by age and their job in the household as well. And at the bottom, I'm just showing some of the crops that women tend to grow that tend to be called women's crops in different areas. So there's cowpea, sweet potato, ground nuts, and goats. And that's it. Thank you. So I will pass this on now to Amy Kébé, who is with Jokalante, and Jokalante, she'll tell you more about this. She is the founder of Jokalante in Senegal, which has been doing some really great work in reaching different groups of people with their mobile services. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Sophia. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Kébé. Ami Kébé in the French way. I'm going to present our work on climate information services as private sector. And just to share my screen. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a video just to present our, please.
À des cycles météorologiques irréguliers. 90% de la main-d'œuvre est issue du secteur agricole et 60% de la population vit sous le seuil de pauvreté. Le changement climatique, qui selon les estimations pourrait réduire la productivité agricole mondiale de 17% d'ici 2050, confrontant les petits producteurs SSP à des cycles météorologiques irréguliers et une modification des écosystèmes qui ont un impact sur la production agricole, le calendrier et la distribution des poissons et des fruits de mer. Cet impact négatif a pour conséquence une plus grande insécurité alimentaire qui menace leur résilience et leur capacité d'adaptation, des pertes de production, des maladies végétales et animales pour les agriculteurs, une réduction des prises pour les pêcheurs, une gestion difficile des sols, notamment infertiles, des ravageurs et les maladies, risques majeurs qui entraînent souvent de faibles rendements. Naforé, service de Jokalante, développe un partenariat de valeur partagée avec les agences du gouvernement et les partenaires privés afin de créer un modèle commercial solide pour un changement durable. Elle regroupe des informations spécifiques à leur secteur d'activité, comme l'information climatique, les conseils agricoles, les informations de marché, mais aussi les opportunités commerciales avec les entreprises, et cela dans les langues locales, quel que soit le niveau d'alphabétisation, en utilisant les nouvelles technologies sur tous les canaux pour rendre accessible le message selon l'interlocuteur. Grâce à Naforé, les producteurs pourront prendre des décisions plus éclairées face à l'incertitude causée par les changements climatiques, développer des stratégies de résilience face au changement de leur environnement économique, augmenter leurs opportunités commerciales sur le marché entre pairs et avec les entreprises. Ceci pour une meilleure réussite des activités pour les agriculteurs et les pêcheurs. Actuellement, 11 000 agriculteurs et 6 000 pêcheurs ont accès à ces services. Notre objectif est de les étendre à plus de 300 000 ménages pour les 3 prochaines années. Si vous êtes intéressé par la résilience économique, l'adaptation au changement climatique et le développement d'opportunités commerciales, Naforé est la solution.
Thank you.
Are you a professional looking to immigrate legally to the United States? Today, we're going to talk about one of the best options to apply directly.
Sorry. Okay. So, Jokalante is a Senegalese social business created in 2016, and our main question or problematic we were facing was, like in Senegal, most of 6% of population cannot read and write, so and live in rural area, which gives these people a lack of information in their sector and activities and the opportunities and services in their localities. This impacts the process of decision making and make difficult for organization working with these people, difficult to interact and get the right data from these people in order to improve the business and work better with them. Also to do business and help them increase and improve their activities, which because this rural market is so undervalued. What we are doing is, as a social business, we gather data, treat and analyze all the right data based on farmers' profiles, which are used to produce and disseminate localized weather information and agriculture advisories in the local language of farmer, as well as providing analytics report to organizations so that they can better engage and strive in their business and project development. That's how we work with, for example, AICCRA project, where we take all the findings and all the climate information services and agro advisories produced by ISAT and disseminate directly to farmers in their local language using their mobile phone. So our platform is a data-driven platform based on farmer profiles and is working as a software as a services. We use these rural profiles and that require literal development, payment abilities, language, and type of mobile device, all this kind of data on our platform, and customize the information and send directly to them based on also social demographic data to work on the behavior change and adaptation and decision-making process take when they receive this information. And this information should be adapted to this target people by school level, languages, technologies, access to technology is the kind of technology access based on the activities. If she's pastoralist or fisher or in the agriculture value chain. So this impacts the valorization in the activities, but also better decision making. We have an inclusive digital toolbox. We are mainly known for voices, but we are doing SMS, WhatsApp, and radio, which is interesting. When I listen to Sophia and her findings, radio are utilized by our enterprise to attract the traction in our platform. So all radio program we are organizing and the content and the quality of content we are delivering impact also the traction towards our platform and push our audience to call back and give their feedback directly. If they receive, for example, climate information services, they can ask for more information, confirm the climate information services, and so on. We have USSD, we have data collection tool for sure for as an app tab and surveys, but also we have a call center for local language with expert, and we receive the call on this call center and share with the expert who gives the answer, and we send back to users in their local languages. So our work on climate information services are based on different problem statement. And from 2017, if I remember, we start working with ANASIM for a pilot just to contribute to the well-being of farmer and agro-pastoralists. And the idea is work at the beginning, ANASIM was producing climate information services in writing, and especially for women who were most illiterate and are under the influence of their husband with the lack of decision in the household. It was important to do all these activities and seek what is the best inclusive channel they want to receive the information. Because we constat a weak capacity to communicate and interpret information at climate timescales with climate information services delivered at the time in writing and in French, sending to technical services, which was inadequate into agriculture for agriculture advisories that this agency will receive, and we had no sustainability plan at the beginning. So we start a public-private partnership with ANASIM, which was the first in Senegal, public-private partnership where ANASIM will produce the best climate information services needed, and we developed a business model around that. To do that, we did a need assessment, a profiling and data, and collect data by gender, by level of literacy, by preferred channel, by preferred hour to receive this information. And this take climate information services to scale, because now we start from 6,000 people. Now we are talking about 100 100,000 of people receiving this information in 6 local languages in Senegal. And all this process are based also in a learning process, because after each campaign of dissemination of climate information, we do all this learning and monitoring and share our learning for more insight. And the gender gap is so evident, if I can say, 70% of Senegal agriculture workforce are women. However, only 15% have access to a land. And this impacts their access to climate information services, because little of them can have access to land. And so we need to study the value chain and adapt the information our women needed. What we did was, based on the value chain and needs, we also collect the data on the preferred hour, the preferred channel, the preferred language, but also the need assessment about the climate product they want, and not to just give them a random forecast. From that, we use also radio to build this trust with human trust voices that are leaders on the community. This push to build trust and increase adoption, but also use women agents so they can interact better with women in the field, especially during focus group, but also demonstration to use the platform and call back and give them. This push to highlight their voices, but also produce agri-advisory considering the value chain women are engaged. And these agriculture advisories are also produced by technical local agents from the government, which help us give more localized information and climate information services to women. We also put a feedback mechanism in local languages and organize many focus groups by women for women, so we can get evidence-based feedback and learn from their feedbacks to improve the service we are proposing to them. Actually, 30% of our database, we have 300,000 around profile on our database, and 30% are women. And for example, for AICCRA project, 23% on the database are women on our platform. So what did we learn? Women profile provide an important opportunity to better tailor climate information services, but also agriculture advisories. We cannot just give the climate information services. The advisories adapted to these climate information services are key, and we can deliver the message on demand, support and link to market, but also to input sellers. Radio is still a key ICT platform, and we are using a lot radio. Every year, it's more than 300 to 500 radio programs we are organizing just to attract people around the platform. And radio messaging is what drives people use phone-based platform. Using women trust voice is key to engage women audience. This space of women, it is what attracts women. When we have one man in this space, the interaction between women, but also the information flow just impact negatively the information flow. Barrier to women use of ICT platform continue to be a real challenge, especially understanding access and control of devices. Use women voices, and so we use women voices and involve women in sharing key concepts and linking technology directly to women's activities. The coping mechanism and resilience to shock and stress are influenced by gender-based inequalities, and shock and other crises weigh more heavily on the livelihood of women in agri-food system than on those of men. And it's understandable because women are driving the family and the organization and all the life around her. Climate-friendly farming practices require more labor, and women who have access to land also face greater difficulties in securing a lot of labor workers. We met many women in the field that have access to their land, but do not have these labor workers. So they don't exploit their land and could not start agriculture activities, which is a big problem. Even some other women had some difficulty to get the right information or to have all this administrative order to access to their land and securize their land, which also was another issue. The use of climate information services and sharing by women is more effective as they systematically share information and advice with their family and friends and push for decision making. And especially, we remark that on the fish sector, when we did the pilot for climate information services access for fishing, the study we made shows that if we send the climate information to the woman, the wife or the mother, she can decide to say to his son and others, you will not go to the sea because it's about life threatening. So that's a key learning about for this sector, the voice and the heavy voice of women have on the decision making to go to fish or not. Because of life threatening based on climate information services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. I think we've agreed to take questions at the end of the session. So let's move to Renee Bullock. Renee is a senior scientist at the International Livestock Research Institute and the gender researcher for AICCRA in Kenya. Renee, over to you.
Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, well, good morning and good evening, in wherever you might be. And as Sophia had mentioned, I'll be giving a presentation about some of our work in Kenya. I'm coordinating research within AICCRA in Kenya. So I'll present a little bit about our strategy and also some of our work that we've been doing thus far. In the Kenya cluster, we do have both the gender strategy and we have somewhat of a communication strategy, recognizing that SMS, while it's gotten a lot of attention, it's not completely socially inclusive for some of the reasons already mentioned by other presenters. There are challenges in phone access, especially in rural areas. So radio for us is a very clear way to at least reach more groups, including women. So within our communication strategy is SMS is one, as sharing of agro-advisories. And we also developed some radio broadcasts in one of the counties in drylands contexts. So we developed radio programs, a couple of different, one more technical and one more related to behavioral change. And we broadcasted those in local language. It's also an important factor in making sure that people are able to understand the content that is being shared. So through radio listening groups, and we have had some group discussions with women and men to get some more feedback on this piloted approach. And we also have farmer field days that have been implemented and are also important direct peer learning opportunities, whether it's agro-advisories or agricultural advice about what to be planting, given that in Kenya, we have a strong focus on drylands contexts. So drought-tolerant crops feature as being very important. However, as I'll share later, there are some challenges in uptake of some of those crops. There are also within Kenya different networks that we learned about. So there are volunteer observers with whom we'll build up more work, I think, in the coming year. So they are actually working with the Kenya Meteorological Department in collecting climate data. So they're really important community members who provide data to KMD to then help support locally specific content. So content about what's going on in a given area, given that the areas are large and diverse. And I think, as has already been mentioned, sometimes the advisories are not specific enough. And so people lose some trust. Some of the activities that we did in the long range, which is in the first half of the year, we had some agro advisories that reached quite a large number of women based on registration of SIM cards. We did 2 different types of radio programs. One was a live talk show in which we had the county KMD officer who gave some information. So it's interesting to hear from the previous presenter about how men's voices may or may not sit well with an audience that includes women. So we did a live talk show that was about 1 hour. And then we did a drama in which we had multiple family members that acted out a kind of a skit in which they received the information and then they discussed it and they planned together. Because of that very issue of receiving, we can reach people with the information, whether they act on the information is another kind of gap that we're trying to better understand and trying to address, especially women's roles in decision-making in households, about how to plan better for what's going to be a difficult season, say less than average rainfall. So there's also been quite a bit of activities around capacity building through the farmer field days and dissemination of drought-tolerant crop seeds. And we've held a workshop in which we engaged some of the community volunteers who collect data, and we're trying to figure out how to bridge more of the networks, whether they're public-private partnership networks. So trying to work a bit more to build on some of the synergies and the activities that are already occurring in some of these contexts. So why did we choose the radio? It's good to hear that there's more evidence-based interventions. This one was also informed by some qualitative data collection that we had done. We found that radios are clearly one of the most accessed, easiest to access, and most reliable sources of information in rural areas. So trust surrounding CIS and some of the technologies is generally low. However, the demand is increasing, especially that in this particular area, they've had repeat consecutive drought, low rainfall kinds of experiences. So there was also an emphasis in the data when we asked for recommendations that there's more work with more collaboration with local institutions. There are there's some local knowledge holders within communities who do advise other community members based on what they see in nature, for example, and then they share that information with others and give some guidance on what to plant and how to prepare. So some of them asked for more collaboration. That also includes religious institutions that tend to be quite prevalent in a lot of these communities and a really important network that I think we haven't fully tapped into. So we did some pilots, as I had mentioned. So we did 3 different sessions over the long rainy season. And those were 1 hour live talk shows with also opportunities for call-ins. So people could call in and share some of their experiences, whether positive or negative, and interact directly with the KMD officer. And then we also did a drama that we aired 3 times. That was the same drama, and it really highlighted some family approaches to climate smart practices, such as investing in water harvesting, kinds of containers or gutters, or some different practices, say side pits and so forth. So those tend to be very labor intensive. So the drama content included how to try to pool income to also have mutual investments in some of these labor-intensive technologies. So we went back after we had done some of these, and we had some FGDs, and we also had feedback meetings. So the FGDs, we had age and sex disaggregated focus groups, as well as key informant interviews with a University of Florida grad fellow who came in. She was supported by AICCRA. And we also had a feedback meeting once we collected these results in one of the wards in Kitui County specifically. So we have learned a few additional things, just a little bit can be shared here, but sure, most people do have access to the radio. The timing matters. I think that's something that was also shared in this presentation. So early evening is the best time for multiple members of the household. So within some of these contexts, men leave for the day and then come back. Women are very much responsible for a lot of the farming activities and a lot of home-based activities in general. And the advisories in Kenya, they've kind of gone out. They're not early enough to enable people to prepare or to gather the resources that are needed, especially purchasing seeds and land preparation. So some of the advisories, because they know that the rains will come late, they do advise for dry planting, but dry planting activities need to happen pretty well in advance because of the labor required. They also said that for the radio programs, they had enjoyed those, and there need to be more, I think, just more sensitization about when the radio programs are going to be aired. So reminders through SMS were recommended. So in some of these FGDs, we did some kind of quantitative data collection through private voting, where we tried a number of different approaches to assess any type of behavioral change that might occur by listening to some of the segments. And in the case of the drama, we played the drama in the group. And we just asked some general questions to get an idea of whether listening to this could influence any kind of decision-making that might represent a change in gender relations. So we asked, if a husband and wife listened to the program, could there be a change in gender roles or participation in planning for what was anticipated to be a lower than average rainy season? And we collected the quantitative data, which is presented in the bar graph, and it shows that most people think that there could be a change, there could be more cooperation. Frequent emphasis was made on why women and men need to listen together, unity and cooperation. It was certainly shared that if women go off and learn alone and bring it back to the household, there's not always a trust of the information that she got. And so it's important that they listen together to support more cooperative planning together. And interestingly, it was only the adult men that thought there might be no change whatsoever by listening together. So just kind of an interesting aspect of the data. So those are some of the key overarching findings. One of the takeaways, again, as mentioned, is that listening together can help reduce the disagreements. So even the way that women and men participants framed what listening together means, it's really something that can help minimize the fighting and disagreements. They framed it in different ways so that there would be less, perhaps, difficulty in trying to implement some of the actual activities based on the information received. So I think some of the challenges in our area are the kinds of cultural dimensions of certain crops. So it's very evident that maize has not performed well because it requires a minimum rainfall that has not occurred in the area. But maize has a very strong cultural relevance in the area, and it's also gendered. So a lot of men especially believe that maize is the only food, and women had shared that if we listen together and he learns about the rains, maybe they can work together and plan differently. And men also didn't seem to actually trust when women get the information separately, that the agricultural officers give them different information than what they would share with men, which is kind of interesting and strange. So a lot of this tends to emphasize the importance of listening together, and some more joint household approaches in this area would work because of disagreement, mistrust, and the importance of trying to bring men along in learning more about some of these activities, or at least make them aware of the activities that will occur. So some of our next steps are to work more especially with the climate observers in these rural areas. So we'd like to, first of all, co-develop some gender responsive content based on gender specific interests, some of those being crop specific, as has been mentioned, but also to co-develop some more gender transformative content. So more radio campaigns working around behavioral changes based on some of the recommendations that we received. How can we better co-develop the content? Certainly the frequency of men and women's voices in a program does attract or not certain listeners. So the men actually said the women's voices are very much heard in the drama, and if you want us to listen, you need more men's voices in this. So kind of an equal participation or representation of voices in radio was important for more joint household listening. We'd also like to work more with the Climate Network, and that is already in process. So we are talking more with the observers and some of the traditional leaders about how to involve them in the forecasting events and the planning activities at community level. There are also some kind of exceptional individuals in the communities working with quite rudimentary technologies that are old, and we need to improve some of their technologies. As you can see, the woman at the top, she's been a volunteer for about 15 years, and her implements are kind of broken, and because of the placement of the rainfall collection data devices that they're using, they often get stepped on or played with by children. But the man below, he was supported by a donor where they actually protect the rainfall gauge itself. So there's less potential for that to break. So another advance that has been made is to validate mobile applications so that these volunteer farmers enter the rainfall data and crop data through mobile phones. One of the challenges with that, it does require a smartphone, but we have an app for it because the way that the climate volunteers work is by sharing through text with a KMD officer. So the room for error is there. And kind of, it's not a very systematic approach. So we saw some space to make some kinds of developments that could help, but we need to validate some of those mobile apps, especially with different individuals who might not have smartphones or might not be really versatile in the use of the smartphones. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, looking forward to those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Amy, as well, for your really interesting presentations from both East and West Africa. Before we open up for some questions, I just wanted to comment on some of the common themes and trends I heard in our session. And I think, you know, the focus or the importance, the continuing importance of radio and voice technologies, voice-based technologies and information strategies. We see it's really important for women, but also important for many people in rural areas. Significantly for women, but we see for other, for other groups as well, in terms of language, in terms of accessibility, in terms of understandability. So that's really interesting. The other thing that was interesting to hear was the role of information in promoting women's participation in decision-making. And so we heard that also with Jokalante. Access or kind of moderating or managing the information gave women a role in decision-making in decisions on when to go fishing or whether to go out for fishing or not. And I'm sure there are other examples. And Renee also pointed that out, that women and men listening together gave women an opportunity to engage more actively in household decision-making around these decisions. And we have seen this before in some of the past work where access to information for women has really empowered them to feel more comfortable discussing production and farming issues with their husbands and engaging in joint decision-making. And then also the interest of also the factor of hearing their voices on radio or television, where the Jokalante example is that women's voices really empowered women to feel that the information was useful for them and that they could speak out. And then also for Renee, the opposite, where men felt that they weren't represented sufficiently. So thank you both for some very interesting presentations. And I will open it now to questions. I think we had at least one participant with their hand up. But Ruthie, maybe you can help us with that. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophia. Yes, I see we have one question. If you want to go ahead and unmute, then please feel free to ask. Otherwise, if you can write it in the chat, I can go ahead and ask it for you. I believe this is Rizwan. Okay, I think Rizwan might be having issues with audio. So if anyone else has questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat, and happy to read those out for you.
Okay, and while we're waiting for questions to come in, Amy, I had a question for you around you made a comment about radio and phone-based platforms being connected. Mm-hmm. And wondering if you could comment on that and give us a little more insight into how the two fit together.
Yes, exactly. In the beginning, I think Jokalante, our platform, are phone-based. And we remark that we go in the field, we went in the field, we do some demo, and nothing happened on the calling, even after the demonstration. So when we organize a radio program, we remark that the radio increase the traction towards the platform to call. So with this radio program explaining things and doing some interactive radio program, people call back using the platform, and we take the call, the feedback on the phone-based platform and diffuse to radio so they can hear their voices. And this cycle, that's what help people understand how to call in with interactive voice response platform as Jokalante platform. It was really interesting, and that's what we did since that. And this push some startup like us to work better on the quality of content. And that's how we become and offer the services, because we work better on the quality of content that attract women, the format, the right format, the voices, how we organize that. This content and the format become important. It's not just a random radio program. The quality become important because we want more insight for our platform. You're muted, Sophia.
Sorry, this is more a comment than a question, but it must be a challenge to provide this information in 6 languages. So
yes, we have some operator dedicated to that. So each languages, we have operators, we have resources, and that's our main job.
Right. Well, that's really impressive.
Thank you.
Great to hear. So Renee, perhaps, actually I have a couple of questions. They might be connected, but you mentioned something about family approaches to climate smart practices. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. And then the other comment was the Climate Volunteers Network is something that seems a little unusual, although maybe that's not the case in Kenya or in parts of Africa. And just wondering if you have come across more examples of that network. Was it something that emerged spontaneously, or how did that come about, and what do you see as the prospects for generating locally relevant data for climate information and weather predictions? Thanks.
Great, thank you. Yep. So the family approach, I think within Kenya context, there is a strong feeling and a history of women targeted approaches that has left men feeling disempowered. So there's a lot of sentiment in all the qualitative data I ever look at from young men and older men that they feel left out of the conversation. Sometimes they willingly just don't even, they don't want to participate in some of the different interventions. They see them as women's activities or too small or insignificant for them to participate. Nevertheless, there's also a lot of women's groups within Kenya. Like a lot of initiatives have worked with women, but sometimes I think that that's had the effect where men feel perhaps irritated and thus less supportive of what women, the information, the practices that women bring home. So it does seem like and I just came back from a field trip, and again, it came up. You really have to at least make men aware of some of the information, not necessarily engage them through all of the practices themselves, but they kind of need some sensitization and even, I think, opening the mindset or changing their mindset a little bit. So that's a theme that has come up over the years in all of the qualitative data. So, but there's also the importance of not letting men take over certain kinds of activities. So there's that aspect of family approaches to support overall household adaptation. The climate volunteers were something that came up by accident when I was in a KMD workshop where they were downscaling the climate advisories for all of the counties, and they referred to them as climate champions. And I think that's an apt term because they are champions. And I think when we're thinking about locally led adaptation and looking at who is already championing some kinds of activities, these volunteer observers are it. They're doing multiple kinds of CSA practices in combination with CIS. So I think that's a network that we need to work more closely with because they are prominent figures in the community and they're examples of already ongoing stuff that is working. So it's been around in Kenya for a while. I didn't realize that data was so important and valuable to KMD that they really use it to generate word-specific advisories. But it's definitely a network, an existing one with multiple kinds of importance within communities and bridging community access to also national kinds of policy, well, not policy, but I think advisory development. So there's kind of a bridge there that we need to flesh out more and strengthen. Yeah. Oh, you're muted again.
Yeah, definitely. And this kind of idea of a different approach to crowdsourcing of data for climate, which is really innovative and well, very cool. The other thing too, just before we go to the next question, is the interesting comment on, how do you, there's this concern always that men may resent new activities taken on by female members of their household, but once we've seen this elsewhere, also in other kinds of projects in different parts of the world, where when men are brought in, when they're part of the information, when they're part of the discussion, when they're part of the training, that can really overcome a lot of the obstacles or a lot of the objections they might have to this. And it probably ensures that their concerns and priorities are also respected. So that's it's great that you found that you have this evidence that you've documented and have really looked at it closely. So we have a few more minutes, and I see that we have a couple of questions here. So this is a question, I guess, Renee, while we have you on, let's start with this one. In your experience, what interventions contributed to social behavior change and cultural practices where women have in cultures, I guess, where women have no place in decision-making?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part? It's what
interventions contributed to social behavior change in cultures or to cultural practices where women have no place in decision-making? The question's in the chat. You can see it too if you want to read it.
Yeah, I think at this stage, we're still trying to pilot and figure out what works, but I'm more and more convinced it's a package. And I know socio-technical bundling is a circulating kind of phrase, but I also thought about it in the past few days that it's no one single approach. So I think radio is good. I think the farmer field days, multiple approaches to engage in discussions actively, and or maybe some of the ways that it's not passive, but that there's multiple modes through which information is received and possibly discussed. And I think the local institutions are really critical. I learned about quite a bit more in the rural areas, the relevance of the religious institutions. They're also important they can be beacons for sharing more on how to support development. So I think understanding how they fit in with climate and how they might advocate for positive changes is also an area of research that we can explore and figure out how we might partner with some of them. It's a little bit of not a usual partner that we look to work with, but they are so relevant in rural communities and their impacts are so much felt. So working with some of those leaders, again, they're already well established and really respected in the community amongst other institutions like chiefs where they are and that kind of thing. So I think strengthening more of the existing partnerships that are also aligned with some of the development objectives is a good idea. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We have another question, and maybe I'll ask Amy to start on this and perhaps speak to this. The question is, there is some decreasing trend for radio and increasing trend to social media in South Asia. So the question they have is how to make radio a more relevant medium for climate information systems. So I guess maybe you can answer the question directly if you want, or maybe just speak to your thoughts on the difference in relevance in radio and social media and which way you see these trends going. Is radio here to stay? Is radio gradually going to be replaced by digital or mobile phones, or are we going to see radio with us for quite a long time? And I guess we have a couple minutes left, so I'll stop talking and let Amy answer. Sorry.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think radio has a long way in the future too, because for us in our situation, social media could not be an issue yet for climate information services access due to lack of connectivity in rural communities. So even if they have access to WhatsApp, it is not always so, and climate information services is for a short period, and the decision making should be taken in a window of period. So it is not like a long information. So that's a key. And I think for us, radio as a medium in South Asia, from this perspective, it will be more interesting. What we experience is when we organize a radio program with the community. And as Renee said, it is not just one channel, it's a mixed channel at the same time in different formats that works. You cannot just pick one and say that is this one working. It is how now we integrate social media to radio content, so we can have more impact. In Senegal, for example, each community radio has their Facebook pages, and what they are doing is launch a direct when they have this kind of important radio program, so people can have access to the radio through Facebook, but also through the radio based on their connectivities.
Right, great. Well, our time is over. Thank you very much to our panelists. And I see Ruthie Burke has sent us a message thanking everyone for attending. All the best. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Night or good morning.
Thank you. Bye.